interest, or for example, if it's private sector, public sector, or do you approach sustainability as in general and start developing the ideas from there?
You'll have to repeat the question.
Oh, sure. How do you, when you approach people in regarding the meaning of sustainability, do you work it out based on their interest, on their needs, or you approach it as in a general way?
I think that if I understand the question correct, I was trying to go as abstract as I could, and then give it an interpretation in specific situations.
Okay.
Vanessa, there's a lot of background noise. You know what that is? That's good now.
Is it better now?
No, there's some conversations in the background, yeah. That's better now.
All right.
Oh.
I don't know what is it. Because
But Hector, I don't know if I answered the question. Maybe you can.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I said I don't know if I answered your question sufficiently.
Yeah, well, my question, well, it's the thing is that in my experience, when you approach people, in this case clients, because you do consultancy, the way to approach them is always tricky, in a sense that you have to sell the idea of sustainability in order to develop a project with them. So I wanted to know a little bit of your experience of how you deal with these kind of topics or situations.
Okay, we were talking earlier with Vanessa about how to approach and we thought that perhaps we'll talk a little bit about the principles themselves, the definition and the principles. So that gives us a conceptual foundation for the discussion. And then I will show you one that's Project Waddit Attir as a particular real world opportunity to demonstrate the applications of the principles. And then we can open it up and have most of the time that we left with kind of dealing with particular questions that people want to explore in a more spontaneous kind of way without following a presentation or anything like this.
So I was sharing with Michael the interest of the group of knowing the application approach of the lab. So we were considering that for that, we need a brief introduction of which is the proposal of sustainability from the lab, and then how was applied in the Waddit project in the sense of what was done in order to make it real and to make it happen. And then perhaps share some methodological approaches and applications in order to put this type of framework into the real world. So because of the talk we had at the end of the last session, so we convene on that structure for today. And in exactly, Hector, when before we joined this the UMA Zoom, we were in another Zoom, and we were sharing, and I was sharing with Michael because he said, okay, next week I'm gonna go to Costa Rica because there the sustainability lab developed a plan in order to work with a community there, which will be the second lab. And Michael was saying, okay, I'm getting a group of key players interest on the project, interest on investing and so on. So your question is like super accurate. So I was telling Michael, okay, you should teach us, the fellows, how to do that. And then he said, like, I really don't have like a formula to do that, but he does it because he has done it in Waddit, and he has done it, I mean, in other like projects. So I think there's a lot of know-how, but I think if we explore these questions, I'm super interested. And I totally get what you are asking, Hector, because so sustainability is not or apparently is not selling now, right? So you cannot sell sustainability because what people care about is profits. But when I also think that in some experiments we're doing with foundations in US and in Boston, we are using the system approach to raise awareness how the system is working and how it's inefficient to be working on a scarcity based, which is like most of our economy is working that way. So
it's actually, Vanessa, it's actually much worse than that, because in many places now the term sustainability is used as continuous profit.
Yeah. So there are, I mean, I think Michael can tell you a bit more about how he managed to convince people to invest in the desert, right? And what we are testing is just to raise awareness of different key players, showing the system perspective, and then walk them through it and make some like kind of pedagogic exercises and try to be like a network of key players, influential people to believe on something after they see what is possible and what are like the downsides of keeping the current models. In any, like for instance, one of our experiments is about education. But in general, I think as Michael is saying, I think sustainability is a harder perhaps area to work on, because it's not an isolated area, but we can delve into this discussion further on. I think Michael is the right one to kind of share his experience with us. So it's already 4:12. I don't know if what do you think we start, right? And perhaps some people will jump in afterwards. Anyway, I'm recording everything. What would you say? Do we start? Yeah.
Yeah, you tell me.
I think we do.
Okay, all right. So I will start with that presentation about the principles, the definition and the principles. And if it's, I understand that some of you have read some of the materials. So if it gets too long or too verbose, just let me know. I'll try to go through it quickly, but I'll follow the slides basically. But I'll tell you a little bit about the origin of that. I remember when we talked about last time, we spoke about the basic concept behind the idea of the lab. And that is that the kind of, at a certain point, I began to understand that the kind of challenges that are involved with the required transition in all areas of our human affairs are entirely unprecedented. I think I mentioned it before, the notion that nobody has there's no experts. Nobody knows how to manage the planet with 9 billion people, with the resources that we have, in a way that will promise sufficient abundance and certainly peace. So if there is no experience, if there's no cookbook, if there's no recipe to tell you what to do, you need to experiment. And that's where the idea of the lab came about, where you experiment in a lab. And what the planet needs today is a global laboratory for sustainability innovations. And that very naive, if you like, and I mentioned Don Quixote concept, came about after many years of working in the context of the large multilateral development agencies. The United Nations, different agencies of the United Nations, including UNEP, UNDP, the Global Environment Facility, the World Bank, and some of the global environmental conventions and so forth. And it's clear that all those entities, although they try to preach some ideas about sustainability and environment, so they're really not set up for radical innovation, which is what we need. And that's why we said, okay, let's do a lab. This was about 10 years ago. And the next thing was a realization that the term sustainability itself became so watered down and so over-applied everywhere that it has no meaning anymore. It became more and more a thing that is politically correct to add to anything. So almost in every conversation, sustainability nowadays has to come in. But already then I realized by making a survey at the World Bank about the concepts of people, what did sustainability means? And that survey went from people from interns all the way to board members, country representatives, and all the executives in between. And it was clear that was a fantastic laxity, that everybody used that term in the way that they saw fit. Now, of course, there is a prevailing definition that is acceptable, that is accepted across the board, and that is the one that came out of the Brundtland Commission, that says that you're familiar with that. I lost everybody. Why? That says that. Hold on a minute. Oh, here. That Vanessa, are you there? Vanessa?
We are here. Yes, we are listening.
Yeah, I kind of lost Vanessa. It doesn't matter. Okay, so.
Yeah, I think just Vanessa. The rest of us are here.
So the prevailing definition that you are familiar with is that sustainable development is development that takes care, that cross-generational idea, that it takes care of current needs without jeopardizing the needs of future generation. But when you think about it a little deeply, you realize that it's very difficult to link that definition to more rigorous operational meaning. It's very difficult to compute economic utility values for future generation. Future generations, of course, are not with us to discuss what's good for them, and there are many other weaknesses there. But it's a definition, it's a typical UN definition, perhaps, where you need to always find the lowest common denominator that everybody can agree on. And in this case, no one will say, I'm against future generations. And so you can pretend that you reached an international agreement, if you like, about the very important term, and everybody signs down in Rio, now we are doing sustainability, but without really, business as usual continues. So I thought that it's very, very important to return some rigor to that concept. And that's what leads to the definition of sustainability that we'll talk about in a minute. The reason for focusing on that, because I'm thinking, what would make the work of the lab different than what is being done in many centers of sustainability, institutions of sustainability, departments of sustainability, and so forth. And I said it'd be very important to start from a clear and rigorous definition of what the term means. And so this is what we'll get to with the definition. So I'll just run through that little presentation about this. I'll try to do it as fast as I can. You can stop me at any time, and then we'll see what it means in the real world. And so the first thing to say about that the concept of sustainability, that it pertains to a particular balance, particular kind of a balance in the interaction between a population and a carrying capacity of its environment. It can be any population and any environment. It can be amoeba in a petri dish, or lions in the savannah, or elephants in their habitats, or humans on the planet. And the point about that balance, that particular interaction, is that it's not a linear interaction. It's a very specific kind of interaction that is very well familiar in cybernetic, which is a two-way. It's a cyclical interaction where the two sides of the equation, population and carrying capacity, continuously affect each other. They basically make each other, if you like, produce each other as the interaction occurs. And in fact, the whole history of the biosphere is a history of that interaction, where the kind of environment that we had in different periods on the planet dictated what kind of organisms, what kind of populations are possible in the first place. And those populations, as they evolved, changed the circumstances in the biosphere that allowed for further evolution and so forth. I'm sure that you all know the fact that, like a few hundred millions, for billion years ago, the kind of atmosphere in on Earth would not allow of the kind of life that we know now, and it took eons of microorganisms to begin to change the composition of gases in the atmosphere that allowed the appearance of higher forms and so on. Now, one thing to say about this, remember I mentioned the UN definition, and the people on the Brundtland Commission were really smart individuals with a lot of experience and so on. I even knew a few of them. And for some time, it really bothered me, and I was thinking, why did they come up with such a lukewarm definition that really didn't have a deep meaning? And then it occurred to me, as I said, that common denominator that you have to achieve in order to get a consensus. And it's clear from the concept that I'm showing you here that the notion of population and carrying capacity were, and still are, fundamental sacred cows or taboos in the international kind of sustainability or any the international political agenda. Why? Because populations are still expanding very rapidly in developing countries mostly. So you could not, it was a topic that you couldn't touch, because anyone who raises the flag of population would immediately be accused of a new kinds of imperialism. The white race is trying to keep the others down and so forth. And on the other hand, when you talk about carrying capacity, all the OECD countries, the United States, Japan, and now some others, Europeans, of course, are not particularly eager to get into those questions, because this is where all the overconsumption and unwise use of resources has really been noticed. So the two major part of the equations that you have to deal with if you want to understand and deal with the concept of sustainability are taking off the table at the outset. Now, if you take that cyclical structure and look at it in a higher resolution, you'll see something like this. You have the population on the left, the carrying capacity on the right. In fact, population dynamic, what makes for any population in terms of its size and scope at any given moment, is in itself a very complex system that is affected by things like fertility rates and birth rates and growth rates and death rates and mortality rates and so forth. And all of those dynamics are not completely well understood yet by people who deal with demography and question of population. So the science behind populations is not completely understood, although we are making gains there as well. But there are all kinds of factors that are quite surprising, including the correlation of not just conscious, deliberate reduction in birth as your standard of living get higher, but actual decrease in fertility itself, both in quality of sperms in males and other things. So those phenomena are not completely well understood yet. But the point here is the population and the carrying capacity. The population affect the carrying capacity of its environment through its activity, the intensity and scope of the activity, obviously, and the carrying capacity have that defining impact on the population itself in a long term. As we said before, that the two parts of the equations are really co-defining one of the others. The interesting thing is that the way that population impact the carrying capacity through its activity is multiple. It's a huge network itself. If you were to resolve that in a system dynamics diagram, you'll have a very complex kind of mapping, so to speak. But when you look at it a little bit, you'd realize that the way that human activity impacts carrying capacity really works through two specific channels, largely. Everything can be collapsed. When you think about it, not very satisfying concept. In fact, an environment is everything that is not you, and you are part of that environment. And that distinction that separates us from the environment, as the environment is something out there, is exactly part of the conceptual problem that we have, I think, in dealing with the world and what we call nature and so on. So demand on resources is one such channel. And the other channel, very important, is the generation of byproduct. Every kind of activity, every kind of physical activity generates byproducts, not just activities of humans. That's a fundamental laws of physics here. And it's vital that the environment in which these activities occur is able to absorb those byproducts. And I think that what we see in our time is that that particular equilibrium that I talked about earlier in the interaction of a population and a carrying capacity has been disturbed. And it's been completely disturbed in the sense that we are, the demand on resources has reached proportion that is higher than the rate of regeneration. This is true certainly both for minerals and fossils, but also for all the life component of the biosphere, if you like, fisheries, forestry, and so on. And at the same time, we've been overwhelming the biosphere with all the byproducts of that activity, which is CO2 and heat and many other pollutants, way beyond the ability of the biosphere, those components of the biosphere that are part of this engine, if you like, to absorb. So the system is, in a sense, out of balance, if you like. And this being out of balance, just some of the key factors here, you know, in that interaction that you saw a minute, is obviously a size of the population, the volume of intensity of its activity, the composition of the environment, the prevailing culture. Here I put everything, the worldview, values, available technology, political and economic organization. All of those are determinants, are variables that determine the nature of that activity. And of course, there are some underlying characteristics there of that interaction that, as we mentioned, co-creating, it's dynamic, it's changing over time, it's beyond steady state, it's evolving and requires a different reconfiguring where you are as you go along. It's systemic in nature, in the sense that you have to bring into view many interacting variables and so on. And it's multidimensional. So from that interaction, from that view of that interaction is where I came up with that particular definition that has kind of gained some momentum especially in some quarters. And it says that sustainability is basically a dynamic equilibrium, meaning it's not an end state that you reach once and for all. It's a dynamic equilibrium in the process of interaction between a population and its environment, such that the population developed to express its full potential. You don't put any limitations there other than one, express its full potential without producing irreversible adverse effect on the carrying capacity of the environment upon which it depends. So there's a number of things that are important about this definition. One, incidentally, is that it mimics that circular structure that you've seen before. Another one is it doesn't put political or other limitations on what should or should not be done other than the irreversible adverse effect. And the irreversible adverse is a very important concept because any activity will have an impact, and some of those impacts will be adverse. But what it says here, you have to be careful that you don't go beyond irreversibility in those adverse effects. So this is basically the definition that came up with, and we can discuss it a little bit in a few minutes to see whether you think it makes any difference. The other thing, of course, is that it's built in a way that all the key variables that it relates to can actually be given some values. You can talk about the volume and scope of a population. You can talk about rates of consumption of resources. You can talk about rates of byproduct generation. You can even introduce a concept of well-being, as is now becoming more and more acceptable, starting with the with the previous king of Bhutan, with the idea of gross national happiness, and so on. So it has many advantages, but I think that the most important of all is that it brings the very tenuous, fluffy, whatever concept term sustainability into a more rigorous, operationalizable, and real sense. You're not avoiding the issue here. And the issue here is the interaction of a population and a carrying capacity of environment. Now, there is another consequence of that definition. Remember, that definition is derived from that basically system diagrams that I showed you a minute ago. And that has a huge and significant implication that I'll make a little side trip to explain. One of the most powerful, very simple, but very, very powerful ideas that came out of cybernetics was first published in a paper that Norbert Wiener, the father of cybernetics, and some of his colleagues published in the 40s. It's a very obscure paper, nobody ever read it. It's called Purpose, Behavior, and Teleology. And in that paper, they did something that looks so obvious that it's almost painful, and that is saying that any observable output of any system, in other words, again, the observable output of any system is mediated by that system's internal structure. You're looking at the black box and you're seeing some output that comes out of it. That output is seen as the behavior of that system. And they're saying that what's happening, what comes out as an output, is a function of the internal structure of that system that many times is not visible. Now, this is a very interesting concept, and think about how many times when we want to reform or change something, we are focusing on the behavior instead of the structure. And what that concept says that as long as you don't change the structure, you will not succeed in changing the output. The reason why I'm putting so much stress on that idea is because what it means, and if you take that the true systems notion into account, then the condition of sustainability is not as is used by most as a goal, as an objective, but it's a systems state. It's a system state in the sense that it is determined and it's mediated by a particular structure. And what is happening in our case is the particular structure of our civilization that is embodied in the structure of the economy, the structure of governance, the structure of how we do things, the nature of our beliefs, how we look at the world. All of those kind of things are a structural thing that brings a particular result. And the result is a not sustainable kind of status of our state of affairs today. And the reason why I'm emphasizing it so strongly is because from the lukewarm definition, that cross-generational thing, the UN went into the list of the so-called Sustainable Development Goals. But it's basically a wish list of good things to have that gives you absolutely no notions about the interaction of those good things to have and what makes them possible in the first place. This is a very, very important kind of thing, because you can actually, this is the paradox there, you could achieve all the Millennial Development Goal, which will not happen, I don't think, by 2020 or 30 or whatever. Suppose if you achieved all of those, and you could put the V next to each one of them, but you achieve it in the current way of doing things, will be in a much deeper sustainability hole, if you will. Yeah, I don't know if you see that. Are you comfortable with everything that I said that far about that notion? Hector doesn't look happy, so tell us something.
I'm sorry. I mean, I think that I don't know. It depends. The thing about sustainability is, as you said, is in a state that must be as it's a code that must be seen as a state, as something that's as a behavior. But the political structure and the power structure sometimes doesn't allow that. Therefore,
for sure. Let leave that alone for a minute. But let's make the first step, saying, recognizing that it's not just something that it's a wishful condition. It's not just an adjective, but it's an actual system state. Now, the question whether you are able to change the structure or not, and what are the impediments for changing the structure, it's a different question. You see, it's a next step. If you accept that, then I'm saying I need to re-engineer that structure, because it defines for us what we need to do. And it tells us that what we need to do is change all the existing structures that lead to that non-sustainable condition. And now the question is, how do you achieve that? And who are your enemies and who are your friends, so to speak? What are the obstacles? But that's a more strategic questions of change, how to bring about change, that is very different if you say, okay, I'll just announce a number of goals and each country will say, I'll try to achieve them and let's see what happens. And of course, it's much more radical in that sense. So can I continue a little more? All right. So basically, you remember that equation, population and carrying capacity. You're all very familiar with that increase in the population, and of course, together with it comes a huge increase in the intensity of human activities. And I'm not making any judgments about it, incidentally. And this is shown in the same curve in the total industrial production, increase in total industrial production, in the whole actual atmospheric measurements of CO2 in the atmosphere, and of course in the profile of energy use. You see, this is something, if you look at the table on the right, and those tables are actually, it's time that I bring them up to date. They end up in the 90s. So if you were to bring this up to date now, and you bring in China and Brazil and India into the equation, that all of those curves will become almost vertical. Remember the climate change thing that Gore used, where you needed a ladder to go on to reach the top of the thing, that you'll get something here. Now, why is it significant? Because look at the period between 1930 and 1960. So somebody like me, I was born somewhere in between, just before that curve starts. And you can see that within one generation, the whole energy profile of the planet has completely changed in terms of the rate of use. Remember the carrying capacity possibility. And remember that all of these are basically traditional, not traditional, here traditional, they use burning wood, but all of those are fundamentally fossil fuel driven, meaning a finite resource, which not only finite, which means that you will not be able to continue with this dramatic expansion of use, but it also a particular resource biosphere can absorb, and that what results in something like climate change and so forth. So anyway, you've got that dynamics going on there, and that dynamic, that the fact that that system is out of balance manifests itself in all the things that we call by mistake, erroneously, environmental issues. These are not environmental issues. These are symptoms of the system as a whole being ill at ease. And when a system is at stress, it begins to show all kinds, like your physiological body, begins to show all kinds of symptoms of stress. And these are all of those that we are familiar with, from climate change, loss of biodiversity, soil, all of those kind of things that we usually associate with environmental problem. So you can ask the question, what goes on here? What is going on here? And there's a number of ways to ask this. I'll put them all together on that. There are three basic perspectives that you can answer. Say, one is there's really no problem. Climate change, we don't know if there's really connection between human activity and change of temperature. The science is not enough. We need more research. So business, basically there's no real problem, business as usual. And unfortunately, this is still the mainstream of thinking in most places, and certainly most vital places, as the corporate world, many governments, and so on. I'm not even talking about the United States at the moment in that regard. Now, there's another perspective which is very interesting, and it's a perspective that has been advocated by some of the best environmental economists, basically saying that the Earth was large, human activity was small, and over the last 500 years, human activity and human economy has grown. The system, the human system, if you like, has grown. The planet stays the same, and we reached limits. And therefore we will need, in order to take care of the expanding population, we'll need not one but 4 planets. And therefore, the way to deal with that is to retrench, to collapse back, to put a brake on development, to reorganize the planet with small local self-sufficient communities and so forth. Now, in that case, my own view is that most of the analysis of is people like Herman Daly and others is very, very good, and they grasp very early the significance of getting out of balance and translating that into actual concept in economic terms. But their solution, the notion that you can go back to a more pastoral, simpler way of life, I don't think it's realistic, especially not when, as it turns out, about 2/3 of humans on the planet still don't have the access to a reasonable way of life and security, food security, water security, and all the other things. And the development genie is out of the bottle, and I don't think you can put it back in. And that brings me to a third perspective, which I think is very interesting, and that is to say that all these issues that we call environmental problems, all of that list that we saw before, are basically symptoms of blocked possibilities. In other words, the system, when I say the system here, I mean the biosphere, including all the other species and humans and our technology and our industry and everything. That system is trying to, how should I say, to resynthesize its next evolutionary reality, if you like. And it's the way to fulfilling that is blocked by all the ways of yesterday, all the way of doing things of the yesterday. This is what Hector, you began to hint about early on. You said that there's all those obstacles on the way. So the current concepts about the economy, I would even say the notion of nation states as the defining organizational structural system, where you basically have 195 captains, each one trying to drive the car in a different direction. All of those are reactionary, if you like. Now, they had their role in the past. They had an important evolutionary role in the past with respect to human affair, but they're basically outdated, and now they are blocking the thing, and that blockage creates all those symptoms that we see as signs as stress. Now, either way you look at these things, it's clear that the whole relationship between population and the planet, human population and the planet, has underwent a complete change. If you look at the same curve of population growth that we saw a minute ago over 300 or 400 years, if you look at it in a larger perspective, this is about 10,000 years, you'd realize that until very, very recently, human population on Earth never reached 1 billion. In a few places it just hugged it, but certainly never went beyond it. And certainly with the Industrial Revolution, which is a totally new solution, you got this huge increase that went from just under 1 to 8 or 9. And why is this significant to look at it like this? If this was a cardiogram, and this is your patients, and you look at the cardiogram, and suddenly you see such a huge spike, and you didn't understand that something completely new has happened here, completely unprecedented, as I said before, then you are blind to what is going on. And it's very interesting that most of the discussion about population scenarios really deal with the top of this curve, the angle at the top of this curve. In other words, whether there'll be 9 billion or 9.5 billion or 10 billion, but the point is that the big change has already happened. And that change is a completely new reality. And that change also has a significant, all the mechanisms that we are familiar with, governance, the structure of the economy, the structure of industrialization, all of those are mechanisms that have evolved over that very long period of time in a reality that was completely different. They're basically Neanderthal tools, if you like, and certainly not, as it turned out, they don't seem to be up to the task of adjusting what is happening now on the planet and interpreting what is happening in the right way and coming up vigorously with the right solution. Think about climate change. From a system point of view, climate change is not about temperatures. It's about basically moving out of fossil fuels to a new energy regime of alternative energy that doesn't create the gases, the noxious gases that result in changes in temperatures. But the focus on temperatures meant that for the last 30, 40 years, the international community has been arguing about levels of emissions rather than about how to get as fast as possible out of fossil fuels and into the alternative. And the discussion is still going on. Should we raise 5% less, taka less? It's totally irrelevant to the main issue, which is how to quickly get evolved into a new regime. So here, Hector, you find a very interesting example for that obstacle, because all the existing interests that are tied up with the oil and gas industry and the car industry and many others are still holding on to, obviously, not because they're bad people, because that's what drives them. They're still holding on to the fact that, yeah, you cannot get that thing, that it's too expensive to move to other sources still, and so on and so forth. The arguments is familiar. But that change, the unprecedented shift that has arisen because of that, has even physical manifestation. This is how it looks. You're all familiar with the night, satellite night pictures of the planet. If you took that same picture from a satellite, let's say 300 years ago, it would be completely different. What you'll get is one dark continent in the case of Europe. And all of this is a manifestation of that intensification. This is a beautiful picture of the intensity of human activity, and it's particularly significant because all these lights that you see here are basically burning fossil fuels. This is a picture of burning up the ship, if you like. And it may look like a very nice party everywhere, but it's we are really this is a picture of a major acceleration in destruction. So it's clear that any way of establishing the concept of sustainability as the organizing principle on the planet requires a fundamental shift in human affairs, which means in our worldview, how we understand reality, in our values, very, very important, in the structure of the economy, in the priorities of our use of technology. What are the priorities today? Anybody can think there? What's the priorities of technology use today? Any guess? Someone? Where does most of the resources in terms of funding and talent, technology, scientific talent go?
Carrie is saying, because she doesn't have mic, she's saying in communication. Claudia Romero, you also don't have mic, Claudia. She says innovation for trade.
I would think that most of the priorities of development goes into weaponry.
Yeah, war.
This is where, if you look at the big defense laboratories, look at Livermore, one of the defense laboratories in the United States, in California. They have like 10,000 PhD there, but they're not working about how to create a new economy or how to create energy alternatives and so forth. They're working on how to get smarter and more destructive bombs.
And Michael, what about fear? I usually work among fear because accidents happen, environmental hazards or insecurity. Usually those trigger changing behavior, human behavior. I don't know what you think about that.
All of those things are very important to move into, but that's not where the priorities are today. If you look at the priorities in terms of where does expenditures go, how does it reflect in the national gross products today? Of the 10 highest spending governments in United States, some of the Europeans, China, India, that's where the resources go, not where they should go. You're talking about where they should go. And the fact that we are beginning to see signs of things moving in other directions. But the main engines are still there. And the how should I say, the arm industry, in terms of industry, income generating industry, is still, together with drugs, is one of the largest. That's what I mean by structural change that has to be affected. So what it means to me is we really have a lot of things to rethink. And there's nothing you can take for granted. Everything that we've known or learned about how things work is pretty much irrelevant. And you have to do some very good thinking to, what does it mean what I mean by doing some very good thinking is understanding the limitations of the current structures and being able to come with superior design. When you talk about structure, you immediately talk about proactive design, because you don't affect structure just by talk, which is most of where the political discourse goes, why it doesn't achieve much. Doesn't matter whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, in my view. At the end, it's a question of whether you are able to redesign a different structure that is superior to the one that you have now. And so what is the objective of all of this? Again, I'm focusing on the sustainability thing. The objective is to foster a well-functioning alignment between individuals, society, the economy, and the regenerative capacity of the planet life supporting infrastructure. At the moment, those main entities that I'm mentioning here, that you can see almost like, how do you call it, cogwheels, are almost disconnected. People behave as though they are independent of nature. Certainly the economy has nothing to do with the physical dimension. It's basically tied now to all kinds of abstract derivatives and all kinds of fancy computation that makes you wealthy and in dollars and so forth, without any regard to what all those activities are doing to the very foundation of any activity, which is that carrying capacity, the physical dimension of the thing. And so with that definition, I began to think about principles. What would be, if you accept that definition, what are the principles that you could derive from it? And I encountered at the time quite a lot of resistance to the idea of trying to come up with principles, because most people that I spoke to at the World Bank, for example, and others, saw the notion of principles as unnecessary or unwanted limitations. And yet these are exactly the limitations that you have to voluntarily assume if you want to get anywhere. It's almost saying that I want to develop some machine to take me flying. And to do so successfully, you better understand the principles of aerodynamics. Otherwise, you act like, you end up like Icarus and Daedalus, right? And the same way, kind of in parallel, if you're serious about establishing the sustainability as a state on the planet, you need to be based it on some basic underlying principles. And that what led to that looking for what would be those principles, what are the minimal statements that you can make in relation to that interaction of population and carrying capacity, that if you violate, you can call it anywhere you want. You can still call it sustainability, but it will not be it. And so for this, you need to come back to that diagram that we looked at about a minute ago. And if you look at the vector, that vector of the activity of the population, for most organisms, that vector operates on the physical dimension, on the metabolic dimension of exchange of energy and matter. In the case of humans, it's a much richer vector that includes some of the things that I mentioned before, the values and the whole cultural thing, the worldview, the structure of the economy, the way you make decisions, all of those kind of things impact the quality of that interaction.
One very quick comment. We have 1 hour left, because we're entering to the principles. Like some or perhaps most of the fellows here already read the principles. So perhaps if we can go to the core aspects of each principles, and then if we have a chance to listen the application.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So without going into the principles themselves, those principles are reflected in 5 domains. The material domain, which is relates to the flow of energy and matter that underlies existence. The economic domain that has to do with what we count, what we value, what we see as profit, and so forth. The domain of life, which has to do with how we interact with other forms of life in the biosphere. We are not very good neighbors, obviously. The social domain, how we organize society, and the spiritual domain, what are the values that drive us? What are the purpose of what we're doing? The last one isn't particularly important because at the end, when you look at it, it's the value, the spiritual domain that is to do with why you are doing things in the first place. All the others are basically techniques, whether it's on the economy or the government or what kind of technology you use. It's how you do things. This is why you do them in the first place. So that the value domain, that spiritual orientation that makes the difference between being a predator or a steward on the planet is what makes all the difference. And then there are, the result is a set of 5 principles with each, each domain has a principle that you've seen that is related to, and each principle has a number of operational implication that are used to it. Now, the last thing that I will say, because we will not go into them now, is that the point here is that if you are true to that definition, then you need to always, in any intervention, if you like, you need to deal with all those 5 dimensions simultaneously. There are many, many wonderful projects around the world today that come under the sustainability umbrella. But if you look at them closely, you'll realize very quickly that they tend to be focus or issue specific. There are a lot of projects about energy, and projects about water, or projects about community, or projects about agriculture. Very rarely all those dimensions are integrated in one holistic design, in one holistic concept. And that's the major tenet behind the work of the lab. I would say that the signature approach, what we like to call the signature approach, combines 3 major concepts. One is a system view and a system-based design approach. Remember the design concept, structure, designing structure, of which system dynamics and mapping system is a tool, but it in itself does not lead to anything unless you impose on it those criteria. So this framework is a very interesting framework, both for analyzing a situation and as a framework for design. So this is one. The other one is a theory of change and and a concept of evolution that makes a distinction between change that occur in a system while the system remains the same, first order change, and second order change, where the system itself undergoes a major shift. It's no longer the same system, if you like. And that's basically what involves some evolutionary things. So we will not deal with all the thing as Vanessa suggested. And I'll just come to summarize it at the end by saying that it comes together to say, to basically understanding that the whole aspect, looking at the sustainability, definition and implication and principles, the whole system aspect is absolutely critical. The spiritual dimension is fundamental. It's almost like the center of gravity that holds everything else together. A balanced integration of all the domains at any given time is essential. And of course, it has a very interesting quality of a holographic unity in the sense that every domain reflects all the others in its own structure. So let me get out of this.
Just before
I will very quickly.
Before you go, I would like to, out of that presentation, I would like to know if those who had the chance to read the principles, because the principles, well, the dimensions are described in the framework, and then the principles suggested and operational implications. So let's say that we've been listening to Michael the previous session and this session because let's say the unique aspect of this sustainability definition is described in the framework. So the question is, do you have any particular comment or even question about the five domains? Because we have like the material domain. Do you remember those who read the framework? What is that about? Because Michael mentioned it now because I asked him very quickly. But the important thing is that if we have any question about the framework, we can ask Michael now, and then it will make much more sense to see how he approached and applied those principles in a real world project. Because like there are very interesting ideas now that intentional design of structures makes way more sense. They make way more sense than using the dissipative structures we have currently. And perhaps this is hard to, it's not so easy to convince people, but now that you get it, and if you see all the interrelations between the different aspects of the systems we are part of, we will see how it makes more sense. Start to applying intentional design to create harmonic, efficient structures. So he described those principles, how to make those structures, how to apply that system science into sustainable experiments, which are experiments because it has like this learning process embedded. So we have the material domain with the thermodynamics laws, which is super important because it goes back to the main scientist on sustainability, Daly, Odum, even Forrester. So it deals like the material domain that Michael described in the framework. It deals with the most, let's say, scientific and hardcore definitions and more clear.
And technology, things like energy and water and so on.
So, and the life domain, the economic domain is particularly important because it invites to start assessing economy and richness and well-being in a different way. So the framework is super important. So now the invitation or the floor is open to see if there are some questions about the framework, the 5 domains. We have also the spiritual domain, which as for some people may sound strange, but if you want to like delve a bit into it, we have Michael here, which is a real privilege. And if you have any specific questions about those, or if you want us to review them quickly before go to the applications, we could do that too. So for me, it's super important that you have it clear, and that if you have any questions about the principles, because this is the approach, right? This is the other sustainability definition that is out there and that is inviting for experimentation. After having that clear, we go to the application. So we can either do questions or we can go fast explaining which is each principle about.
I would suggest actually that we leave the principles for a moment.
Okay.
And I will talk a little bit about the project Waddit is a particular demonstration of their application. And that will make it easier perhaps to deal with the thing. So let me just set it up and we'll get into that. You need to review it and you want to do slideshow. And you have to go to the beginning. All right. So remember, the idea of the lab itself is to develop over time a portfolio of showcase projects in on different issues in different parts of the world that demonstrate the application of those principles that you have read and looked about and now heard a little bit about, and at the same time to develop the lab as a network of R&D and education centers around the world that map onto particular ecozone. So desert areas, and this is what we are doing in this project here, tropics, the humid and the dry tropics, and that relates to our activities in Costa Rica. And over time, we hope to cover the planet, going to island ecologies, urban ecosystems, coastal zones, alpine, and so forth, you name it. That's our plan for the next 10 years, if you like. So at Project Waddit, which is a project with a Bedouin community in the desert, Negev Desert in Israel, what we tried to do is to basically, the project has three main goals. One is to do something that contributes significantly to what is a really marginal community, marginal and really at the moment at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder in the country. So to contribute to this community significantly, to demonstrate an application of the principles in a real world situation, because the principles are expressed in fairly abstract terms, which is exactly what gives them their power. They can then be interpreted, as I said, with respect to particular situations. But when I was talking about what I'd like the lab to do earlier on, for most people say it was very difficult to connect those abstract ideas to actual activity. So I realized that we really need to start getting quickly some projects on the ground to demonstrate what we mean. And that opportunity came with that particular group in Israel. And what we tried to do there, basically, essentially, it's developing a model for agriculture, for sustainable agriculture in an arid area that is based on the tradition and experience of the Bedouins with the desert, but leveraged with high technology. I think that's the key idea there. So it's basically, if you like, an experimental farm that has a number of functions in it, raising animals for dairy products, a whole operation with medicinal plants and so forth, which I'll talk to in a moment. So in that project, we tried to design it so that it innovate radically in a number of dimensions, if you like, that reflect those 5 domains. So, for example, on the social level, the Bedouins are still very clannish and tribal, and the tribes don't do very well and so forth. So we said from the outset, we want the project team, the group behind, the community behind that project, not to reflect one village or one family or one tribe, but to really reflect a cross-section of Bedouin society. And therefore, that the founders of the project, if you will, should come from different tribes and different places and different things. This is one. 2, we said, I don't know if you're familiar, but in the Bedouin culture, the position of women is not particularly strong. And it's really segregated in many ways. We said from the outset, we'd like women to be part of the project team and work together with men. This is no precedent, incidentally. There's a lot of activities by women who are pushing for innovation in the Bedouin community because more women get better education than men. But they usually work as groups of women with other group of women. There is no mix. And we insisted that women will be part of the project team from the outset. We're very successful in it. Today, the project team, we've attracted some very powerful young ladies. Today, the project team has about 30 individuals. Half of them are young women. And I'm very happy to report, because this is unheard of, earlier this year, but 5 months ago, we appointed a young Bedouin woman as a CEO of the project. And this project is a large project undertaking now. It's about a $14–15 million operation. So innovation on the social domain. On the economic domains, we said we're not interested in simply job creation, which is the mantra used by everybody. We want to develop with capacity building, create a group of entrepreneurs that launch their own businesses and own it and are responsible for themselves and for it and are the only benefactors, and so on. On the life domain, it more reflects the idea of humane way of dealing with farm animals, but also in a complete revolution in the biodiversity of the site, which I'll show you at the end. This is probably one of the most exciting aspects of the project. On the, I don't know what else I didn't mention, the technology, the physical domain, we designed a very interesting, we call it an integrated infrastructure of green technologies to be the infrastructure that supports all that operation. And it basically based on the idea of turning all waste into resources, connecting all the functions such that the byproduct, the waste byproducts of one becomes the, the feeder of another. And of course, using only reducing emission as far as possible, having a number of ways to impact climate change by soil enhancement and planting and so forth. And of course, having alternative energy sources, no use of fossil fuels, that the whole operation will be supported by a combination. It'll be the first in the world when it becomes operational, a hybrid solar, wind, and storage system. So basically, this is the area in the south of Israel. Don't worry about all the details here where the project is located. This is my counterpart. Something very important, you talked about conditions. You have to have local leadership, a partner with you, because otherwise you are nowhere. And Muhammad al-Nabari, who is my partner there, is a local, actually mayor of one of the Bedouin towns, and he's very unusual in the sense that he has a PhD in chemistry, which, as you can imagine, there are not too many Bedouins. So he's well educated. He immediately grasps what we are trying to do, and we've been working for the last 10 years. We started this with a very long 1.5 years of talking to people all around the community, you know, to say, yeah, have an open discussion about what this project should be, who would do what, who will be involved, what will be the purpose, and so on, in all kinds of settings. This is a typical, very traditional setting. Here's when we are trying to recruit this young lady who was phenomenal and expert on medicinal plants. Here we are talking with the Association of Herders to alleviate their fear. It was very important to get involved with the community at large to make sure that people, even if they're not involved with the project, support it. It's a very violent community, and if people are suspicious that you're doing something to undercut them, you will not get anywhere. This is the site that we have. It's that I can't point with my finger on it. Can I? No, you can't see it. There is a rectangle in the middle here that you can basically see along that river. That river is Wadi Attir. Wadi is the Arabic term for ravine, and this is the ravine, Attir ravine, and that's what the project get the name. But as you can see, this
Michael,
is basically...
you can move your mouse. You can move your mouse, and I think we will see your mouse on the screen. Just you can just...
right. Right. Okay, so this is the piece that we have here. It's about 100 acres, about 400 dunams, this thing. But basically the point is that it's, as you can see, this is a satellite picture from 2008 when we started. And you can see that this is basically a moonscape. There's really nothing there. And I'll come back to that aspect a little later. So the first thing we did, we formed a project design team. And that project design team included a few people from the community who've never done anything like this before. And some of them cannot even read or write well, together with a few researchers from the university that could help us with the physical design, all the technology aspect, the energy, the water, the soil enhancement, the building, the green architect, the guy with the beard here is a professor at the local university there who runs a kind of desert architecture department and so on. And today the project team, as I mentioned, is much larger. It's about 30 people, half of them women. That project team that you see in another picture here was responsible for the physical design of that site. This is the same site that I pointed out earlier. As you can see, there is on the north all the different farm functions. We have on the extreme right, that square is a visitor center that acts both as a ecotourism destination, as a technical support for the outlying villages, and it emerges as a major educational hub in the whole region. We have about 30 high schools that come there regularly. We have teachers programs and even programs for kindergarten kids. Then you have all the farm building. Most of the light green are pastures where we are growing organic feed for our animals. It is a mixed herd of goats and sheep for dairy products, organic, high quality dairy products. The darker green areas are areas where we are growing desert medicinal plants that the Bedouins know very well in order to create a whole range of health-related cosmetic products and so on, and so on. So in 2013, we started working on the ground. We built all the facilities. This is a diagram, don't worry about it, that shows how all the functions are integrated. Remember I said the integrated infrastructure of green technology, where all waste of one function goes into the next. Basically, it demonstrated the waste into resources approach that in relation to our digester, basically we take the wastewater, this is only one component, wastewater and manure from the animal pens. It goes to a digester, produces biogas, which we don't need for energy, but we want to demonstrate this principle, if you like, that is not familiar in this community. And we are using a device that is for the scale of family household, if you like, which is an issue of many of those people because of the waste that they produce. So the digester creates water and solids. The water goes to wetlands that we are constructing now as we speak. The solids go to produce high quality compost that we use for fertilizer. The manure goes either here or here. And the wetland, then the water goes for irrigation, not of things to eat, but irrigation of all the plants around the buildings and so on. This is basically a sketch of the combined solar, wind, and storage area. Those things are not photovoltaic. These are basically mirrors that reflect the sun into units that holds very highly pressurized air. So we pressurize air into 13 psi and then heat it to 800 degrees centigrade, very high temperatures, and the hot pressurized air is run through turbines to create electricity, and we store that hot air underground in balloons to reuse it again. And like this, we can optimize the output of that system between this day where the sun is high and the evenings where the wind is strong, and so on. This is some of the early experiments with that solar system. This is a typical view of the mirrors. The mirrors are now installed in the project. We are connected to the grid. We can supply the grid or take from it. These are early experiments with the biogas. Now, biogas is nothing new, radically new, but most biogas experience come from use of manure from cows or pigs in China, United States, India. And as you know, that kind of physical material is wet and very plentiful. We need to deal with the very dry, small pellets from goats and sheep. So this young person on the left with the green shirts is a young professor, young researcher at the university. He's worked with us to develop it. That's the first pilot to demonstrate that we can get good quality and good quantity methane from the manure that we have. This is now under construction. The wetlands that we are doing to purify the water. This is the compost facility. All the irrigation is done by drip irrigation. We brought the animals in, a beautiful combination of goats and sheep. We started with about 250. Now the herd approaches 700 already. And we had a number of cycles already of birth where we can, because it's a dairy farm, we can sell the male kids, which is a very, very good actually source of income. And we have taken a number of groups of women through courses of modern cheese production. And out of those, we chose a few to make our dairy products. We started in a very primitive way, as you can see here, but basically to provide sample of cheeses, yogurts, and things like this to visitors. But since then, we have put in place a first class, probably the best in the whole South, milking facility that allows us to milk now twice a day, and completely automated, and a beautiful dairy, completely modern, very good equipment, and start to produce and market a whole range of dairy products. This is a yogurt, the best yogurt you ever had, incidentally. And these are the ladies who are working and producing the different cheeses. And then we have this truck that goes around and sells all the things to stores around the area. These are the products that we have, and they are also in the stores. You can see this is a local supermarket with the Waddit Attir products. And the Waddit Attir products are sold even in fancy restaurants in Tel Aviv now. This is a restaurant that has on its menu this dish that you see here that is basically eggplant, grilled eggplants with olive oil, herbs, and Waddit Attir yogurt. And it says so on the menu. And I can't even transfer to you the concept, what it means that we are able to sell to restaurants in Tel Aviv from the products from that little operation there. Now, this is the other initiative that I mentioned, the medicinal plant. This fellow here that you see, Ali Al-Awashli, is a local sheikh that devoted his life to the Bedouin knowledge of medicinal plants. Medicinal plants, of course, were the only healthcare system. You don't have hospitals, you don't have, so you had traditional healers that related, that depended on plants. And the desert is home for a very large number of very potent medicinal plants that are not even known to science yet, that the Bedouin have been using for many years. So we are trying to, first we started to experiment with finding those plants that are not in one place, obviously, and starting to domesticate them. And it took us 4 or 5 years to learn how best to grow them, because in order to produce and sell products, we need to grow them under irrigation in large quantities. And these are wild plants, so the question is how to grow them without losing their potency and so on. So we did all kind of experiment. We did very well. These are now the plants on our site. We have, I think, about 12 acres now under cultivation, all with drip irrigation. And the plants are doing very well. These are all kinds of sages and so forth. We had a number of harvests. We have these great facilities for drying those things. And we've already created a line of about 10 cosmetic products that are sold in the different stores. This is a local pharmacy. And then we are participating in many farmers market and so forth with the Waddit Attir product that are doing quite well. Incidentally, we started selling in 2016. In 2016, the income from the project's product were about 12% of the operating budget. Last year, 2017, it was 24% of a larger budget. This year, we'll be approaching 40%. And I think that in 2 years, we'll be able to cross the line and really the thing will become self-sufficient economically. These are, again, people buying. The other operation, some Bedouin culture, some Bedouin families still keep seeds of authentic local vegetables. These are simple things like tomatoes, cucumbers, things like this, but they are extremely nutritious. They're really packed with good stuff. They're desert hardy. They can do without a lot of water in high salinity, but nobody uses them anymore because everybody buys kind of genetically modified, useless, nutritionally tomatoes in the supermarkets. So we are collecting those seeds where we find them. We are developing a seed bank, and we are beginning to train groups of women in treating those seeds, in creating gardens, and in growing them in order to begin to bring back growing self-reliance on growing your own vegetables in family plots. It's a totally women-led program, incidentally. And we have very nice yields that we are using mostly now for collecting seeds, more seeds. We'll also be selling seeds and selling this. We've taken women through a number of courses of healthy nutrition. Nutrition is like with many Aboriginal groups that entered overnight from traditional to Western diet. They've been decimated by everything that you can think of, high blood pressures, high sugar levels, all kind of cardiac things, some cancers, and we are beginning to work with women to understand but better nutrition and going back to traditional ways that are much more helpful. We are growing our own. We have a number of beehives, so we can make our own honey, and we have a wonderful olive plantation that has been yielded already quite a bit, and we're producing olive oil and selling that as well. This is the visitor center a few months ago. This is how it looks today. This is where the classroom, the laboratories are, a hospitality tent that is full of activity. These are some of the school kids. This is a view from above of the visitor center and the hospitality tent. We have one of the laboratories there, and a lot of activity there. This place that until last year saw about 700 people every month, now it's almost 4,000 a month, which is quite amazing. Now they have nice facilities for everybody who works there. And these are the school kids that come now. As I said, 30 local schools are coming there to do their studies and learn about the ecology, learn about the sustainability principles, learn about the environment, learn about animals, learn about everything. They come and they also work with us. They learn about the bees. We also started a program for kindergarten kids that are 3-4 years old. And they begin to learn about the environment, about animals, about other forms of life, about the bees here, about the soil itself, about the plants, about the animals. We even did a summer camp that taught the sustainability principles that was very successful, and we'll continue with that. We have hundreds of visitors from around the world every month. I think at least about 1,000 visitors. That's the ecotourism destination from all over. These are local Israeli families that come on weekend with their kids. This is the World Economic Forum. The kids from the US, from Germany, from China, from Malaysia, some high-level dignitaries, all kinds, doesn't matter who they are. But now I want to show you one particular aspect of that project that I love to use as an example, because what we're trying, I mentioned before about those areas of innovation where we want to produce very powerful innovations, radical innovations. And this goes in my mind with the notion of second order change. So here is an example of what I mean by second order change. This is the plot of land that we had when we started that you saw before. The interesting thing to say about this is this area of the northern Negev is not a natural Negev like you get in the south. This is man-made desert. This area was very fertile only 2,000 years ago. And in Byzantic time, it was full of little farms. And actually, it was one of the bread baskets, like North Africa, of Rome. They used to export wheat from here to Rome. And actually, on our sites, we found the ecological remnant of a Byzantine farmhouse. But so hundreds of years of mismanagement, of overgrazing and monoculturing depleted the soil completely. So the soil is infertile, doesn't grow anything. There is another issue here, and that is that soil that is coal-less is such that when it rains, even the little rain that we get here, which is about 120 millimeters a year, 120 millimeters a year, the water doesn't, when it rains, the water doesn't seep into the ground. The top becomes hardened like concrete. So you get these patterns of erosion that you can even distinguish on this slide here. And small ravines feed into larger ravines, and you get that phenomena into that part of the world that water never stays where it falls, but forms huge floods about 20 or 30 kilometers away. But no water stays on the ground. So one of the aspects of the project, we said we want to do three things. We want to restore the soil to fertility so we can use it for farming, for producing food, for pastures and so forth. We want to return the fertility, stop that erosion, and have an impact on the biodiversity. This is a site that had perhaps a couple of scorpions and an occasional raven if there was a dead animal in it, dead, basically. And so the way we went about it, so basically we want to demonstrate an approach to reversing desertification. This is how the typical erosion pattern on the soil, this is how the place looked like when we started. This is pictures taken 8 years or so ago. We decided to return the soil to fertility by massive planting. We actually planted about 5,000 shrubs and trees with the idea that the trees will now sequester nitrogen, increase the carbon content of the soil by the leaves that fall and so forth. And of course, with their roots, keep moisture in place. So for about 5-6 years, we grew all this variety, about 17 or 20 different species of appropriate plants in greenhouses until they became strong enough, and then we moved them to the site. Meanwhile, on the site itself, we created that system of low impact, low earth mount, almost Nabatean technology, in order to stop the runoff and capture, harvest rainwater. And in those areas is where we planted the trees, we moved them. They all did very well right away, actually. It was very interesting. And in the first few months after planting them, we used drip irrigation. We worked with Netafim, which is one of the world leaders, global leaders in drip irrigation. They worked with us in installing all of this. This picture is taken in 2013, I think, or 14, after the first rain. And this is the first, as you can see, this is the first time ever that water actually stays in the ground. If you look at the picture around it, you see that there's no bodies of water like this. And it's quite a lot of water. And what we're trying to demonstrate here is even with little rain in the winter, that will suffice, captured like this, and then held down by the roots of the trees, we can go from season to season. So this is about 9 months after that rain that I showed you. The trees just took off like unbelievable. And we also planted a lot of edibles in order to demonstrate the agroforestry potential of such an approach. So we have pomegranates and figs and the olives, of course, and even citruses. And within 9 months, everything changed. Because what happened there, this is grass that is like 2 meter high. And this is without irrigation and without seeding and without any intervention. What happened here is once the trees took hold, this is really nature doing its own way. And the way that all those plants impact and interact to strengthen each other. So the trees basically now provide protection to seeds that fly in the air from ultraviolet radiation. So the seed now can germinate. They're protected, they get shadow, they have nutrition from the thing that falls from the trees, and of course moisture that the trees keep in the ground. This happened very, very fast. This is like within a year or so, a year and a half of when we started, that things completely changed. And what happened with the biodiversity was absolutely amazing. With those trees taking roots, all the flora on the ground floor within a season completely changed. So you got all those flowers everywhere. And with those flowers, these guys begin to appear. Again, we didn't bring or invite anyone. All these cross-pollinating bugs. And you don't have to wait long before all of those guys follow. Again, a place that had only an occasional raven, we counted now 55 different species of birds. Many actually nest there. and many are birds that migrate from Europe to Africa and back, and they begin to use the site as a layover destination, a place to rest for a few weeks and feed before they continue their journey. Some really rare birds, some close to extinction, all kinds, all sizes and shapes. This is amazing. This is a desert. You never see the thing there. As I mentioned, nesting on the place there. Very rare owl. All the snakes and lizards and so forth. Even this year we found the turtle. This is a very endangered species in the country. We don't even know how it got there. It's a she, incidentally. We feel that it got there with a flood. In the winter, there was the Waddit was flooded, and maybe she was kind of pushed by the water from somewhere else and then just climbs to the site. Rabbits, and of course, once you have this life, you get predators. So there's a few families of foxes there now. And this is a typical picture of that site in the spring. That's the same site that you saw before. And this is in the winter, the duck swimming in one of our ponds. And I use this picture here became for me like a mascot, if you like, of the project. When we started, everybody said, this is impossible, you'll never get anywhere. This is an impossible idea. It's just a fly in the whatever sky, a pie in the sky. It's as impossible as a duck swimming in that place. And those ducks now come every December where we have these pools of water. So this is basically the story of that project that we've been working on for 10 years now. And it's a very important demonstration for us of the lab's signature approach to development, to sustainability, and so on. I think this is it, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Michael. Perhaps after this, even if I was there in Attir this year, and I know the sustainability framework, and we've made some another beginning of a project. For me, today, while listening to you, Michael, I was I'm kind of getting the sense why these are principles and not a set method, and how that makes sense with the experimental approach. Because I always I was pushing for a method, and I think we still have to develop some systematization of how things were happening. But I understand why principles in order to innovate, right? To release the potential of all the people there and all the territory there, and perhaps test different schools and different methods. So anyway, this is a reflection I had. And I know this group was also very interested about how to apply the principles and how to make those applications. So I would like to know if there are some comments out of the presentation, or some questions. And just very quickly, I think it's very, once you go there and you see around there's everything is dry desert. How impressive it is to realize how if we read again in the sustainability framework the material dimension, and then the operational implication of the material dimension, we will see that there's a principle of order in the universe that is described there in that definition. And how actually remember that Michael said before, is about unlocking the possibilities, because currently the systems we have are locking the potential and locking the possibilities, and we are struggling to make artificial systems that are not in order with the logics of life. We are making those, we are struggling to make those work. But what happens if we start believing and testing and experimenting with listening, right? With all the potential, all the interrelations that are there. So for me, and I will end with this, and open the floor for questions. For me, is very one of the main outcomes that I think the lab itself, I will say that now we have that presentation, but I think we haven't measured that. It's like, how can you make this not only reivindication process, but how can you design the living structures for Bedouin Palestinians communities to live in a different way in a land that was for 2,000 years a desert? How do you do that? So if you ask that in Israel with the political conditions, with all the culture that is the dominant culture, this will be impossible. So you will see that, and it's impossible to do it in the desert. It's impossible to do it with the Bedouin Palestinians. And then you have this, right? And then I love one slide that Michael presented. I took a screenshot of it, but I think it's very, very relevant to answer perhaps these questions that he was showing, like which are the values, like sustainability, establishing the concept of sustainability as the organizing principle on the planet requires fundamental shift in human affairs, in worldviews, in values, in the structure of the economy, in priorities for use of technology, in governance. So there are many things, and then when we hear these, we think it's impossible. So that's why, for me, it's also an honor, and it's beautiful when some of the lab goals is to demonstrate that it's not impossible, right? And that great things can be achieved if we use those principles. So, and then coming back to Hector questions, how do we apply that? How do we convince people? I think that's a very huge potential area that perhaps our generation has to take on, right? To start thinking, how can we do this cultural shift? How can we demonstrate? And I will just leave it here. So if you have like some of you that were particularly interested in the applications, what do you hear? Which are like these still questions that you want to express, or perhaps some considerations?
Let me just, before some question come up, let me just say one thing that came to my mind as you were speaking, Vanessa, and that's the notion of a system here. We didn't do, incidentally, I do it a lot for my own sake quietly, but we didn't do a lot of system diagram here. So I want to talk about what does it mean system in this case. The whole point of system thinking is understanding that complexity is key, is important, because in complex system, it's their complexity that makes for their viability and robustness and everything else, because it allows the richness of changing states and so forth. So, for example, Israel has been very proud of itself for many years in making a huge efforts in forestation. And there are some agencies there that are in charge of planting trees, and they've been very big in raising funds for trees, selling a tree for your name, or you can buy 100 trees or whatever for the last 70 years. As a result, they were able to green many parts of the countries, and the ethos, people like to show here, you can see the border exactly, because on the left it's green and on the right it's desert. Now, when you look at it, one of the problems there that most of those forests are monoculture. They're all pine trees. They're not ecosystem. And what we wanted to achieve here is an ecosystem. What does it mean? It means a plurality of putting in place a plurality of species and let them interact. Because you see, it's fascinating. We have no clue about the interactions of plants with each other. There's a lot of fascinating research now that beginning to demonstrate how plants are able to communicate danger at a distance without even root connections. So there is a lot of, and the importance of one species of plants to the other, how in an ecosystem they interact in terms of the quality that enhances the viability of the whole. And so we said at the outset, we want to create a system here. We don't want to have another plantation of pine trees or something. And that's why we chose a very large number of different species. We put them all together to see what will happen. And what will happen was nothing short of a miracle. And then it goes, so it also gives you a very fantastic insight about the huge power of nature when you let it be. All of the things come together and they feed on each other in a positive sense and enhance each other. So you have the trees, then you have got the plants on the ground, then you've got the birds and the insects and the other animals. One of the things that we are doing there, we are doing a very interesting research on the increase of ant population on the site. There's one guy who's doing his doctorate on it actually now, and he's there every week counting the ants that he can find and the proliferation of ant. Why? Because ants are a hugely significant element in soil production. They are the one who introduce organic material into the ground by taking all those little pieces of leaves and stuff that we think is garbage and bringing it underground and creating those ventilation channels and all of those kind of things. So the notion of, and the same with people. So you want to create a diverse project team and bring all those things together and not work only on water, separate from energy and separate from that. So that team worked together for 3.5 years, and it was more difficult than working with a Bedouin community because all those researchers, they're not used to share and to understand the impact of I'm working with water, what does it mean for the energy system? I'm water with water, what does it mean to the something else? But I think that, so how do you create those integrated complexities in each one of including the supporting environment for that project? So one thing was to isolate it. Let's take it out of the political argument. Let's take it out of the local fighting between Arabs and Jews and this, what, and that, and so forth. Let's create a protected environment, put a group of good people together with a good purpose and see what happens. If you allow them to, and the people is just like the trees. If you can create a little bit of freedom around a group like this and be able to supply or to secure the necessary resources, suddenly people change and grow and evolve and become more capable. That's the whole idea of the capacity building. And all our approach always is to segregate, to differentiate, to fragment, and that doesn't lead to anywhere because you need those synergetic energies that come together from putting complex things together. That was the ceremony for the day.
Well, I have one question. What if dealing with a community that it seems not to have a spiritual domain? Does, at the moment of doing an intervention, do you work on that, or how do you develop a spiritual domain? It should be our responsibility to develop it. What do you think about that?
We spent a lot of time, actually a few solid months, in coming up with what we called the projects, not the broader sustainability, the project's own declaration of principles, almost like a constitution, or the Declaration of Independence. And that declaration of principle that is expressed in one page describes the value proposition, the value commitment of the group of people who come together. This is the way that we're going to deal with the environment. This is the way we're going to deal with each other. This is what we mean by succeeding economically and so forth. And everyone who was involved with the project had to sign it. And in fact, when we had the ceremony for the, how do you call it, the stone, how do you call it when you put the stone and you start building? So anyway, we buried that, a copy of that Declaration of Principle on the ground. But this has been, and it still is, a major drive behind it, because the tendency always is to get away from it, but we always can, it's on the wall. and remember what you said you are committed to. So in the case of this project, the way that the spiritual principle came into being was by putting together a long and difficult process of articulating what is the value that this group is committing to. And I can, if you are interested to see how it looks like, I can send Vanessa a copy of the Declaration of Principle, and you'll see what I mean.
Great. I will be super interested in reading it and sharing it with the group. Is it? Do you have it in English?
Yeah.
Ah, great. That will be awesome, actually.
Yeah.
Hector, your question is also like, how did you create that connection, or?
Yeah, how did you trigger? Because sometimes it's so difficult to trigger to just as an external, or well, as you said, even coming with someone close to the community or in the community, how to trigger this kind of coordination or I don't know, Vanessa, maybe you understand what I'm saying, how to integrate interests in one same objective.
There are two concepts that are very important here. The first one is the whole idea of design that I was emphasizing earlier on as distinct from problem solving. In most places, they like to deal with problems, like the problems of the Israeli and the Palestinian and so on. When you focus on a problem, you're immediately becoming, how should I say, you're captured, you're trapped by the language of that problem, and therefore you never come out. The concept of design, which is really due to my mentor, Buckminster Fuller, I've learned it from him. When you talk about design, the approach is completely different, because what you're doing there is not solving a problem, but projecting a desired end state. You say, this is what I want to achieve. What I want to achieve is an airplane that can fly at 30,000 feet, at 3 times the speed of sound, and be able to go for 24 hours without landing and carrying so much weight. So you specify an end state that you want to achieve. And then comes only the question, what needs to be put in place in order to achieve it? And in some complex system, incidentally, some technology system, once you do the specification, those specifications can exist even before you have the science itself or the technology of how to achieve it, which is very interesting. But it tells you what is it that you have to invent, what is it that you have to develop. So the same here. You start with a notion of what is the thing that I want to be able to achieve there, and then you say, okay, what are the things that I need? I need the support of this. I need the support of that. I need to get funding. I need to get the community to participate. I need some leadership in that community. I need to create a capacity building. I need to bring those capacities from outside that don't exist in this community. I have to integrate all this into one, and so on. This is one aspect that is very important, and it takes time and patience. This is why so many development projects that I've seen don't work, because nobody invests this time. I had to put 10 years in this project, and it was important to me because I wanted to demonstrate what the idea behind the lab is. But I've not seen much precedence to this. Most development projects, the concept is created in an interaction between a Ministry of Finance and some high-level official at the bank, for example, and then it goes on the road. There's no connection to a community. So that thing is one. The other aspect, the effort, is what I'm talking about. The design principle, the commitment, and the effort. The other one is, of course, don't take no for an answer. Don't look at difficult things as difficulties. Yeah, there are obstacles, there are challenges that you have to overcome. And part of your role as a designer, as a change maker, is to figure out how to bring about that change. It's not always easy. You go forward sometimes 2 steps and then 3 times back. But how over time to create that movement and how to create, I think the integrity of what you are doing is very important. People can sense right away if you are in this for yourself, to make profit, or you really want to help the community, to work with them to help. All those things have to come together. Again, it's a system, if you like. how to bring the operational, the application of all of this together in the way you behave, in the way that you interact with people, in the way you build the team, in the way you attract people to work on a challenge and so on. And my view is, although you need to always be conscious of design limitations in the sense of putting the right structure in place, you always have to be on the sides of opening up rather than closing. Do you see what I mean? Let possibilities manifest themselves. I mean, think about it. I mean, the whole universe, the whole cosmos is built to create possibilities. And we think that if we impose our criteria on something that we don't even understand, we'll do better. Let it be. It's going to teach you something if you are listening. I don't know if that was a good answer, but I tried.
Anyone else? Alexa, Chuy, Cari, Clau, Georgina, Andrea, Rodrigo, Cecia, Magnolia.
Everybody's speechless, huh? No, come on, there must be some comments or some...
If you have any question about, like Hector raised very good points today about like how to make it happen, right? When the whole system is working towards or in another direction for now. And
you know, I'm talking mostly in positive terms, but don't think that we didn't have many disastrous moments with all of this over the last 10 years, where you despair. So again, that don't take no for an answer. You have to push. If you want to achieve something, you got to stick to it. To whatever. Which is why, this is also very interesting, which is why starting with principles is so important. It's very different than starting from interests, right? If a group of people come, each one has a different interest that they want to advance. It only leads at the end, they can be harmonious for a while, but it will end inevitably to conflict. If you start with common principles, you have created the basis for collaboration, which is very important. And the more powerful those principles are, the more effective that thing will be. This is why it's so difficult for organizations like the United Nations, for example, to be effective. If you look at the Declaration of Human Rights and all of those kind of things that come out of the UN, they're fantastic. They're more beautiful than anything produced by humanity. But as a mechanism, you've got there again a bunch of competing interests. They're not there to advance the state of the planet, really. They're there to advance each one their own little things. So they don't start from principles. They start with at the core. But they start from the periphery of conflicting interests. The OPEC countries are not particularly interested in talking about stopping producing oil, right? So you're already at the non-starter from the beginning.
I would like perhaps to make a question to you guys. When I think for me, I wanted to take this slide. That's why I made a screenshot for the end of the conversation, because so what we have seen so far is sustainability defined by the international forums. We had a session on that. We have a session of sustainability defined by systems dynamics approach. We have this exposition. We have talked about perhaps some other ways of understanding sustainability. But when you see these, that the concepts of sustainability should be an organizing principle on the planet, and that we require to change worldviews, values, structure of economy, priorities to use technology and governance, and how all of this is a second order change. What comes to your mind? So because I will really like to know where are you at now after several reflections and several talks we had together, and also listening to other people. We had also a very, I think, a moving talk with Angel. So what would you say, like, when we are thinking about sustainability, because most of you are working on that? We have assessment. If we go to the ecological economics disciplines, there are many assessments. But where are you now in the understanding of sustainability? Any of you? Are today you're super quiet?
Well, there was a note that Shuri sent, and maybe you can speak it. Oh, you can't. Okay. Basically, the way I understood it was a question whether we believe that that sustainability is possible in the world today, right, with the current ways of thinking. Well, on the face of it, it's not, because everything goes in 180 degrees against those principles in many ways. But on the other hand, it's absolutely essential. So the question is not whether it's possible, as we said a minute ago. The question is not is it possible or not. Is it important? And if yes, what needs to happen for it to happen? And if you and I agree to commit to it, let's work together to see that it works. Don't worry about what doesn't work. Let's focus on thinking. That's the whole idea of experimenting, of lab. Let's try to see. We know what doesn't work, and we know that getting out, that leaving the convention is not the way to go, and destroying the EPA is not the way to go. And giving license to all the oil and gas companies to start digging in Alaska is not the way to go. But let's not despair from the fact that this is the current picture of things, and let's begin to think out loud. If those principles describe the condition, if we understand the condition is a system state, the real question to ask is what needs to happen in order to bring that about. And that's, to me, a design question, right? Now, you can see how the political pendulum swings from one extreme to the other, but either extreme is not the solution. So I look now, I'm despairing. We're trying, for example, to do some fundraising from the labs because we are operating with very, very little resources. We want to expand our activities. We need more resources. And I see where the money is going today of most major philanthropists in the United States. Because everyone is so upset with Trump, billions of dollars are going into making sure that the next guys will be the Democrats. But that's not going to change anything. Whether it's Bill Clinton or Obama or Trump or God knows who, it's the same system, the same old system cranking here. That's why it's really a issue of creativity.
Yeah.
How do you imagine a world that works? How does it look? What is needed there? And then see if you can put that model out there with the only how should I say it? With the only faith that basically humans are intelligent pieces of consciousness and they will make the right decision when they have the options to choose.
No, it sounds very familiar to me, everything you're talking about, Michael, because of this other community I'm part of. I want to send them this recording. But I know some of you are working in very amazing project. So I would like also to know if you have like anything that is coming, any idea after listening to all these experience that Michael is sharing. If you listen to what to what he shared with us, and you kind of start having any motivation to do something, or you perhaps are thinking about how to solve any specific question regarding to your current work. Any ideas or feedback after this talk? I think it's cool, right? Because the idea of having this space is really only having a learning community, like listening to each other and try to support whatever you're doing in your head or in your actual work. And I don't know how long Michael can stay here. We are a bit out of time, but if he can give us like 3 minutes, 4 minutes more, or I don't know which is your availability, Michael. But if you want to take the chance to ask something or share something, I think this is a good time for doing it.
Somebody was typing something. For some reason, I don't see the full thing about Sebastián or something. Instituto.
Yeah, Cari was saying that listening to you reminded her the project of Instituto Terra promoted by Sebastián Salgado in Brazil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His name, I really admire him as a photographer. And only recently I learned about some of the stuff that he's doing. There's nothing that I would like more than connecting with him in some way. I think he's getting a little difficult to get to because of his celebrity status, but he would be an incredible ally for what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah, we should look for those allies.
Yeah.
Rodrigo was also saying, I guess you guys cannot open the mic. He was saying, I was thinking about gradual consciousness improvement in world population and some factors that may induce people to think deeply their actions and words. So
well, obviously this kind of improvement is essential. And what is very interesting is that there is a lot of very good news that are coming recently from the neurophysical sciences, where we're learning that the nervous system first is much more plastic than used to be thought, that it can be regenerative. For example, when I went to school, the common wisdom was that nerve cells in the brain don't regenerate. Now we know that it's not necessarily true. But also, what is emerging is that your own thinking, your own practice, your own way of doing things and thinking about things is a major, that's another fundamental system concept. It is a major force in rewiring your own brain network. And why is it significant? Because we understand very well that the human nervous system mimics the evolution of nervous systems in evolution. So you've got the early snakes kind of stuff there, as well as the cerebral cortex. So the frontal lobe and the cerebral cortex, the cerebral cortex, are relatively very recent evolutionary phenomena in relation to the reptilian and other automatic parts of the nervous system and the brain that control how we do and how we behave. So some of the ideas that are beginning to emerge is that behavior, human behavior, what we call this is human behavior, it cannot change. In fact, can change a lot. Not only it can change a lot, but depending on your practices, you can rewire your whole network, and you can affect the transition from it being dominated by the lower levels, so to speak, the flight and fight, the fear and fighting instincts, to the higher consciousness and awareness level. So those are not only possibilities that are open to a few saints, but they are open to every human being by virtue of the structure of the nervous system. And as it turns out, a lot of the so-called spiritual practices in many spiritual traditions, meditation and all those kind of things are actually devices to rewire your nervous system. And that's why I'm saying all this, because that's an incredibly positive news. It means that almost every individual can become a Buddha, which is what we need at the end of the day, so to speak. So I think it's a very important thing, because it tells you that there's much more degrees of freedom in what we call human behavior than meets the eye. The things are not completely determined. They're not hopeless. We're not stuck with this forever. But with the right awareness, with the right consciousness, with the right actions, which is what many wisdom traditions have been teaching for always.
So after this, we have a super long message from Clau. But Clau, can you open your mic, or it's not possible? Or Laila, it's okay. Yes, yeah, I think you can open it very quickly. We can say hello to her too.
Okay, but you probably listen to her cartoon aside, well, in the back. Well, as I was saying,
no, let's him talk. You keep quiet. Let him talk.
What? Her talk?
Hello, Laila. Hola.
Hello. Hola. Well, she's been very quiet. I was saying that I started my research project on water management, like realizing that the word as a term, sustainability, was everywhere in every source I consulted. Every research had it somehow, somewhere written on their word. But to me, it seemed like it was like an accessory, like something that had to do with the subject. They thought it should go there because it was like an associated term. I don't know if politically correct, if a fashion thing, but I had the impression that it meant very little. That
was my point.
Yeah, in the course of seeing the results of their studies, it ended, it vanished. It disappeared, although it was mentioned over and over. So I started to have this doubt about whether I should include it in my research or not. And I had a professor in school that made us question the word before starting this course. And I realized it's been instrumentalized a lot. Like everything, all enterprises, products have the label sustainable, and it like as if it has adapted to the market rules.
Yeah.
And then
instead of the other way around, yeah.
And it worked like a I don't know how to say, like a blank card. Like,
yeah.
And so I was very reluctant, very skeptic. I was like only gonna mention that instrumentalization in my research and just move on. But after all these talks, what I was writing is that I actually realized that re-meaning the sense of the word, actually I get to the core of what I've been seeing in reality with my research, and of my intention as I started the research. So it's really unexpected. I didn't thought I would find all this in that word.
Well, this is a difficulty that I started with, because I became very quickly aware of the stuff that you are mentioning now, that the word lost its meaning completely. So my first instinct was to say, let me invent a new word, which is what a lot of people are trying to do now by talking about resiliency or this or that. I think these are not the solutions. So at the end, I couldn't come up with a better word. So what I'm going to do is something else. I'm going to give it a definition, which I think is correct. And then I'm going to use that. And I'm going to declare that at the outset. Because as you say, in like 99%, 99 out of 100 uses of the term, it's nothing to do with anything. People talk about corporate sustainability. What they mean is whether that company will continue to make profit over time. So in many of these uses, the concept is used dramatically correct, but it has nothing to do with that issues of humanity and the planet and so forth. That's why starting with that direction of population and carrying capacity is so important. So even, you know, I told this many times in a recent yoga class that I went to, the young woman who was the teacher was talking about sustainable asana. You know, how to keep a position over time. You go and say corporate sustainability. I'm beginning to collect, I see sometimes ads, sustainable real estate, you know, so, thing like this. So yeah, so I know that in my case, I say, this is what I'm in, and this is what are the implications to whatever it is that is the issue. So let's say I have a project of this or that. I start, this is what I'm in, this is what I'm trying to achieve. This is the end state, right? Remember the design, the end state? And now that end state will have different manifestation if it's an architectural issue or a social issue or a production issue, an economic issue or whatever. But you start with that definition and then you interpret that condition in light of that definition, and then you achieve clarity. But without that clarity, because what happens now, you go into the UN and people say, okay, now we are about sustainability. Everybody says yes, yes, but everybody means something completely different. So you have to start, this is what it is. And then what are the implications? What are the operational implications of that?
Actually, now I'm having trouble to imagine, but I'll give myself the time how to integrate operationally this definition. But I've seen that our next activity for homework is like modeling our understanding on sustainability after all we've talked about. And I was wondering if I made a model of the reality I'm looking in my research, would it be a lot to ask if Michael could give a look to that little model?
I'll be delighted. Yeah, I will be very happy to do it.
Thank you.
And I think so far homeworks are not working very well with in these seminars. So I think that could be your project if you're working on that, and if Michael and others from the group can take a look to that, I think I think it will be interesting for everyone. And thank you, Michael, for your availability. And there are couple of questions. Couple of comments. I don't know if you have more time. I will read it very fast and you will let us know. Rodrigo says, in case of other disciplines, there is holistic integration instruments that are being used to explain and prove different phenomena in systems, structures, and behaviors such as violence against women, poverty, and nutrition, hunger, racism, discrimination. Holistic integration uses the whole notion of reality to build a systemic analysis and explain something crucial for sustainable development. And should we just...
I think the point that is important is that with all complex systems, there's more to it that meet the eye. So when you talk about drug use or poverty or violence against women, you can look at it as a monoculture, the one thing. You say this affects this, then that's it. But if you begin to look at it in a holistic way through systems mapping, for example, you can discover many other aspects that you didn't think about before. Not only that, you can discover the impact of many interactions that are not intuitively obvious. And especially if you do it in a group, you can also begin to develop some agreements about those things together as a group, and those are very important things.
Okay. Any other comment, or can we? I want to spend some, like around 10 minutes with the group to see, I was giving it a thought and some proposals for kind of making a project, an individual project out of the seminar. And I think, like, of course, Michael don't need to be in this conversation. And I guess we need also the full group that today we don't have, but we can start sharing some thoughts. I have some proposals and you can tell me how that sounds. And Rodrigo says, thank you, Professor Michael. So if there's no any other comment, Michael, thank you. Thank you for making us a space. I know you're having a great time. Please.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And say hello to Tanya, please.
Thank you. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Entonces, pero supongo que si, o sea, Clau tiene micrófono y los demás no, entonces escriben en el chat. Pero les quería comentar que he estado pensando cómo podemos tener... voy a dejar de grabar aquí porque... Michael, one last thing before you leave. Will it be fine to put this class in YouTube and send it to some people I would like to introduce to the lab's ideas, the video?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Start again.
If we will it be fine to upload this video into a YouTube, because I will
yeah. You can do anything you want.
Okay.
All open source.
Thank you.
Bye again. Buenas noches.
Buenas noches. Gracias.
Bye. Gracias.
Bye. So, entonces, he estado pensando, porque lo que sí, digo, uno de los objetivos principales de este diplomado es realmente despertar esas otros entendimientos de diferentes disciplinas y enfoques de sustentabilidad. Y todos ustedes sé que están ocupados y que están trabajando sus propias cosas, pero se me ocurrieron algunas formas que creo que serían interesantes para poder integrar lo que hemos visto. Todavía falta mañana la sesión con Joshua. Si pudieran darle, primero a lo mejor empezamos con eso, si pudieran darle una ojeada o al menos ver el video de Said Hassan de los Social Labs, también va mucho en la línea de la experimentación. De Social Labs se está utilizando como un enfoque para hacer proyectos en sistemas complejos y porque eso funciona más que la planeación estratégica, etcétera. Entonces está como toda la propuesta de los Social Labs. Joshua trabajó con Said Hassan específicamente por algo de tiempo y desarrollaron como un pequeño un guide para hacer Social Labs, pero Joshua ha estado trabajando con la Academia para Cambio Sistémico, está trabajando con algunos, digamos, filósofos contemporáneos de sistemas complejos, como Alexander Laszlo, y con esta network de Global Education Futures. Como el rol de Joshua es como trabajar con Social Labs. Él era el exdirector del Borderlands Restoration Leadership Institute, que es laboratorio de sustentabilidad, que está haciendo experimentos en la frontera de México y Arizona para restaurar las relaciones ecológicas, sociales. Entonces, bueno, Joshua va a estar mañana con nosotros, por favor. Él trae, como les digo, como la escuela de los Social Labs, es profe de permacultura, está vinculado con varias organizaciones de cambio sistémico, con varios experimentos, y es parte de los autores de este Global Education Report. Entonces, si pueden como ojear, el reporte es muy largo, son más de 100 páginas. El libro de Said, pues también, pero si ven el video de YouTube y ojean como el Education Report, creo que pueden venir un poquito más preparados. les recomendaría que, yo no sé si leyeron o no leyeron el framework de Michael, pero sí les recomendaría darle una ojeada. Es un framework que es súper interesante. Hay algunas cosas que creo que tienen que estar en debate con otras escuelas y entendimientos de sustentabilidad, pero es un framework súper interesante, los 5 dominios, y a lo mejor puede ser que estas 2 pláticas con él hagan clic y se integren un poquito mejor en su entendimiento. Y sobre esa integración, pues lo que sí interesa en este curso es que haya pues un proyecto, ¿no? O sea, Héctor me contaba que ahorita está trabajando en consultoría ambiental, entonces él va a empezar a modelar algunas cosas que está haciendo y empezar a integrar lo que hemos visto, ¿no? Entonces, aplicarlo a su trabajo y a lo mejor tener un proyecto que ustedes estén, digamos, enriqueciendo con las ideas que vayamos viendo, puede funcionar como para trabajo, como un trabajo final que sea parte de toda la evaluación de este diplomado. Otra cosa que se me ocurrió, pero no es para todos, es que la conferencia de economía ecológica va a estar el 10, 11 y 12 de septiembre y va a ser en México. O sea, esa es un espacio privilegiado para podernos empapar más de estas ideas. La conferencia de economía ecológica generalmente es en Francia, en Islandia, en India. Ahora toca en México, está el profe David Barkin de la UAM dirigiéndolo con su grupo de ecología ecológica. Los enfoques están de ecología política, de geopolítica, mucho pensamiento al sur global, vinculado con assessments científicos de qué es sustentabilidad. Van a encontrar ahí, creo, es algo súper, o sea, es un evento que yo procuraba ir cada año, ¿no? Nada más que sale caro cuando es en otros lados. Ahora es acá. No sé si yo voy a estar, pero pudieran inscribirse. Les digo que esta opción probablemente no es para todos, son 3 días en Puebla, pero las pláticas valen la pena y los investigadores mexicanos y también internacionales que van a estar ahí también valen la pena. Entonces pensaba, si esto es de interés para alguna o alguno de ustedes, que tengo que hablarlo también con el resto del grupo, pues decir para quién, porque pienso que también eso está en veremos, que si hay 1 o 2 personas van a la conferencia de economía ecológica, les voy a poner aquí en el chat el programa. Entonces ahí está el programa general y el programa por días. Entonces, si ustedes pueden escoger una temática y empezar a hacer como un reporte de lo que vean en la conferencia de economía ecológica, un reporte prácticamente libre. Ay, ¿qué hago? A ver. Bueno, este es el programa. Les quiero poner en el chat, pero por alguna razón no puedo. Se los pongo aquí. Si las personas, si esto es de interés para alguien, se me ocurre también que un trabajo final puede ser que vayan, que escojan una temática, que entrevisten a los expositores, a los profes, y que presenten como un video, ¿no? Coherente, así como, no tiene que tener la gran edición, pero a ver, tal persona habló de esto, y que ustedes se graben también explicando las ideas que han podido integrar de la clase. Entonces, con base a si hay temas ahí que les interesa, poner en diálogo algunas ideas de expositores ahí, está súper interesante. Espero que, o sea, no sé, pero también creo que no puede ser que todos vayan, ¿no? O sea, como 1 o 2 personas, y si hay alguien que diga, bueno, esto sí me late a mí, esto puede ser mi trabajo, final, que lo digan pronto para que los demás sepan que pues eso, ellos no es para que se reporten.